And the Chinese premier is next headed to West Africa and Nigeria, to be specific. For more details on Nigeria-China relations, we're now joined live by CCTV's Peter Wakaba. He's standing by for us in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Peter, after the successful tour by the Chinese premier to Ethiopia, he has now headed to Nigeria, to Abuja. What is expected to come out of this visit?
Well, Beatrice, literally, to put it literally, many good things simply because China is fast emerging as Nigeria's largest trading partner in this part of the world, and the investment from China that is going into this country has been growing by the leaps of bounds. We have been going around to look at exactly what has been happening, and I can tell you that the picture itself is very interesting, simply because China has been assisting this country transform itself in many different ways, not just socially, its infrastructure, and in other ways too. Now, Nigeria is home to 170 million people. It is 47% of the West African population. Its bilateral relations with China date back to the past century, almost 50 years ago. And if I'm right, this year marks the 50th anniversary of those relations, and that is one of the reasons that the Premier is visiting. Nigeria is a country of many firsts. It is Africa's foremost and largest oil producer, producing almost 2 million barrels of oil a day at its peak. It is Africa's most populous nation and now has become Africa's largest economy. It is a country that has also led in technology, being one of the first in Africa to launch its own communication satellite, built in conjunction with China in the last century. Ever since late Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai's maiden trip to Africa half a century ago, Africa has become increasingly important for China's foreign policy and trade, and both sides have continuously created mutually beneficial and win-win prospects. Nowhere is this more apparent than in Nigeria, where Chinese companies are hard at work helping transform the country through infrastructure and social development, and one of the countries to host the Chinese premier on his Africa visit.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of the very first visit by our late Premier, Zhou Enlai, which was 50 years ago. So this year is significant. And also, this Premier Li's visit will be his very first visit in his capacity as the Premier, because he took over last year.
Though Nigeria has undertaken a GDP recalculation exercise which saw its GDP jump to some $510 billion from an estimated $270 billion previously, the country still faces a major challenge in poverty reduction, usually a challenge for any developing country. The population, though, remains fiercely optimistic.
Well, China used to be where we are now. A lot of poverty. I remember when I was young, I used to read a lot of magazines from China. A lot of rural areas, a lot of poverty. But somehow, they've managed to grow out of it. Second largest economy now. Okay? Therefore, if we borrow their concepts and their practices and their way of doing things and their way of thinking and the way they look at life, we too are going to make it.
These challenges, however, haven't stopped the country becoming one of the largest trade partners with China on the continent. According to the Institute of African Studies at Zhejiang Normal University in China, the trade volume between China and Nigeria as at 2013 stood at some $13.5 billion, an increase of 75% from the $7.7 billion recorded in the year 2010.
On the whole, I think we are very much satisfied with the trade relation between China and Nigeria. Nigeria is the third biggest trading partner of China in Africa. So, and I can foresee potentials for the trade relationship between China and Nigeria.
Chinese companies have been working in Nigeria for over 40 years now. One of these is the China Civil Engineering Construction Company. According to the company's chief executive in Nigeria, infrastructure development is just the first phase of cooperation between the two nations, with technology transfer already taking place.
We set up 2 schools. One is in Lagos, one is in Abuja, for the training of the Nigerian staff. Improve the technology ability and the transfer of technology. And also, some senior staff, we send them back to China, to the university for training.
Nigeria remains the biggest market for Chinese construction companies in Africa and third in terms of bilateral trade relations. Nigeria is now Africa's largest economy after rebasing its GDP. And with over 65% of this country's population being the youth, it is projected to experience a massive and dramatic jump in prosperity and growth over the next few years. Peter Wakaba, CCTV, in Garki, in Abuja, Nigeria. Well, indeed, the numbers themselves, they are telling the story. The fact that China and Africa have been cooperating in a big way, and in particular with Nigeria. Some of those companies that we have visited to read just what they were doing have extensive projects. One company in particular, CCEC, has over $13 billion in different contracts spread out across 120 different sites in this country. But of course, moving away from that and going to what's happening regarding the World Economic Forum, the forum expected to start off shortly in just about 12 hours' time, that is tomorrow. And particularly being overshadowed by the stories coming out of Nigeria as regarding the abduction of the girls in the north. The president having come out to say that he will leave no stone unturned, he will do everything in his power to get them back, and offers of assistance continuing to stream in from across the different parts of the world. We, of course, will keep at it here and keep you in consistent, up-to-date with what is transpiring at the conference. And it's back to you in studio, Beatrice.
All right, Peter Wakaba will be joining us a little later on in this program for more on the World Economic Forum for Africa.